Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Aggieville Alleycats podcast, where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news you so love. I'm Ace Edwards, right alongside
Connor Balthazar.
And welcome back, my friend.
It's good to be back. It felt kind of weird listening to the episode, and it was just you into the void.
Yeah, it felt weird recording those episodes because it was kind of just waiting for someone else to laugh at jokes that are mostly in jokes. But always glad to have you back. And before we get into the West Virginia scouting report, we do want to thank sponsors of this episode, and that is Greg, Arthur, and Grandma. Thank you, Grandma. And if you want to support the show financially, please be sure to check out the official Aggieville Alleycats link and the merch store, both in our podcast and Twitter bios. But let's dive straight in to the matchup in Morgantown up against the West Virginia Mountaineers. And just on top, they have a 3-3 record and a 2-1 conference record. Flat out, this is a team that is better than their record. I genuinely believe that. This is not me trying to glaze opponents out of fear, because every time I say something negative, it immediately blows up in my face. No, I genuinely believe that this West Virginia team is better than their record. They just have a really big problem with fourth quarters, because their losses this year are, they got blown out by Penn State. All right, that one's fair. They barely lost to Pitt and a come behind drive. And then Iowa State needed a little bit more effort to put them away in the fourth quarter as well. And their wins, granted, they don't look that impressive, beating FCS Albany, beating KU by 4 on another last-second KU choke job, Lamau, and then pretty handedly beating Oklahoma State 38-14. So, Connor, I'm going to give you you put it in near perfect terms in the 20 minutes that we inevitably spend before we record every single episode talking about the episode. But I think you put it in perfect terms, but I'm of the belief that this is a better team than 3-3. They just went through a rough non-con, but you came up with probably the best way to put it. So by all means.
I forgot what I said. So can you go ahead and say?
You said that is the home, like losing to great teams and pretty handedly beating teams that you should beat. That's just called being a solid team.
Oh yeah, I did say that. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. I don't really have anything else to sort of add or elaborate to that. I think that this is a solid West Virginia squad. Is it as good as some of the West Virginia teams we've seen in the past? Probably not. It's probably on that same. It's probably a little worse than the 2022 squad, but you got to remember that game wasn't easy for K-State.
Yeah, that 22 game, I remember we got out to like a hot start, and the offense was just clicking, but we just couldn't quite put West Virginia away the entire time. I imagine that it'll be a pretty similar fight in this one, because for one, playing on the road anytime is always going to be a challenge. But another is that this is a talented West Virginia team, and even though they're 3-3, that's a misleading 3-3. Like they have some losses to some really good football teams. Every team they've lost to is unbeaten right now. So there's a lot that they can draw from that. They're also going to be really motivated, in particular, because K-State is really kind of the last significant major challenge that they have until playing, I'd say, Texas Tech on the road. Maybe Cincinnati's been all right this year, so you could say that. Plus, they're kind of regional, so they have that going for them. But this is going to be a really big game, and K-State's the only ranked team left on West Virginia's schedule too, so it's a big opportunity for them to put some momentum together. So this is a losable game. This is a game that West Virginia could very easily beat K-State in.
Yeah. So now that we sort of got the over the top of the team out of the way, we can move into the offensive scheming. And Connor, you can take the first two little bullet points here because those sort of pair well together.
Yeah, so on offense, they've moved away from the old air raid West Virginia style that they ran for what felt like a really long time, and they've moved into more of a traditional offense that just so happens to have some spread principles. They'll run a lot of 11 personnel, but they sprinkle in some 12 as well to make the run game a more legitimate threat in the RPO game. And then looking at the raw numbers, they look like a much more run heavy team. That's a bit deceptive, though. Probably around 15% of their passing plays end up with a Garrett Green scramble. So it's going to read as being 40% pass, 60% run, but the truth of the matter is that it's closer to being a 50-50. I mean, Garrett Green, he's run the ball 65 times already this year. Uh, and that's with 10 sacks. But regardless, that's a lot of rushes for a quarterback. He has the third most carries on West Virginia's team and the second most yards. They have three guys all kind of sandwiched in the high 300s in terms of rushing yards. But no, this is a pretty balanced West Virginia attack.
Yeah, and a lot, like I said, like you said, it's a lot of scrambles, which we'll talk about more whenever we talk about Garrett Green. But this is really a sort of massive shift in philosophy, even from previous Neil Brown West Virginia teams, because there were Neil Brown teams that were air raid teams. But this one is much more, I don't want to say it's like a ground and pound offense, but it is a more traditional kind of, you run to set up the pass as opposed to pass to set up the pass. And I think that's full disclosure, I didn't watch a lot of West Virginia last year, so I can't really say as to how much of that happened last year. But I think a lot of it this year comes down to the fact that they do have a pretty talented backfield, which, again, we'll talk about a little bit more. But this is not the West Virginia team of old that focused on passing efficiency. This is a lot more of a, run the ball, play action kind of team.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. But we can move into some of the next stuff now in offensive schemes. So this far this year, they've been very good on the third down to this point in the season, converting about 45% of the time. But even if they don't convert, the odds of them going for it on fourth are very high. They have the third most fourth down attempts this entire season, and they convert those 75% of the time. So this is an offense that loves to extend drives, and they're going to make a point of it. Basically, is what we can get at. So that's something that we'll have to keep an eye on. Try and force them into third and fourth and longs. I can't think of a much better way to get them to get rid of the ball, I suppose, other than forcing turnovers. But that's going to be our best shot there. Then additionally, in the red zone, they're a touch below average in terms of scoring percentage at 86%. But in 72% of the time, they're getting a touchdown. And in the red zone, they've been so aggressive that they've only made 4 red zone field goals the entire season. So again, this is a hyper aggressive team in go for it situations. So that is something that we'll have to be keeping a pretty big eye on. I mean, they've only punted 14 times this year. So like they want to keep the offense rolling. They are not a team that likes to give the ball away willingly because they know possessions are limited and they're becoming even more limited in today's football. So they want to hold on to the ball and they want to keep a drive going as long as they can.
Yeah. And I think a big part of their third down conversion rate and their willingness to go for it on fourth is just they're an offense that is either at the sticks on third and fourth down, where it's like third and three, third and two, or fourth and three, fourth and two, or they're on like fourth and 37. So like those are really your only two options, or an interception has been thrown. Like that's it. Those are your choices for going up against this Neil Brown team. But that sort of efficiency, weirdly enough, makes it easier to justify being aggressive because you're not taking stupid risks. You're just sort of taking the occasional, analytics based risk. And I'm not sure if it feels like Neil Brown has sort of embraced the analytics side of the game, especially with the amount of times that he's gone for it on fourth down. I don't know this for a fact, but going for it and being that efficient is just sort of the hallmark of a team that really focuses on analytics. And that also goes with refusing to kick field goals if you can avoid it.
Yeah. And I think that there's one more tendency there, or one more maybe explanation there for Neil Brown and his hyper aggressiveness. And it's something that's really been lingering around Neil Brown for like probably 2 or 3 years now. And it's that he's kind of been on the hot seat for like 3 years in a row at this point, which that would start to get to a guy, I think, constantly being nearly losing your job. It feels like constantly. Last year, he put a little bit of separation on. They didn't have a particularly strong schedule. But this year, he's kind of really back onto the hot seat, particularly with this 3-3 start. He's a good coach, but he knows that he needs to start putting some wins together because they got handled by Penn State, dropped the backyard brawl, and then they lost a home matchup against Iowa State. And just the day that we're recording this, I was trying to convince fans to come to games by saying the tailgating is fun, and specifically made mention of the fact to like ignore the results on the field, which Chris Kleiman said that I think we'd have to do an emergency pod.
Well, we kind of did. Remember the begging for positivity?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Although to be fair, it worked. Because since that moment, K-State has actually been a very good football team. But I think that's the exception to the rule, I would say. But no, it was a pretty big media gaffe by Neil Brown. But the point is that on top of probably likely focusing on analytics, I think even taking it past analytics. Like I think he's probably being more aggressive than like the computers would say to in a lot of situations. Which isn't like the worst philosophy in the world if you're consistent with it. I mean, it's just it does. I'm not going to say it's desperation, but I'm saying it's possibly a contributing factor. At the end of the day, I don't know. He may just be an analytics guru. That may be just what creams his corn, but he is just been a dead man walking for like 3 years now, which I guess is indicative that maybe he isn't a dead man walking. But that put a lot of stress on a guy and definitely make him a little desperate to make things happen.
Yeah, which I think that leads pretty well into like his passing game scheming, because it really is one of those weird cases with how he schemes up his passing game.
Yeah. They are a heavy play action team. 28% of the time they are running play action. And their screen rate, though, has dropped pretty significantly from their heyday. They're down to just over 10% on calling screens, which is a bit of an interesting wrinkle. But the play action, definitely a heavy reliance there because they want to establish the run. This is a more run-focused team than they've had in the past. And play action also probably works to Garrett Green's strengths. He's a very athletic and mobile quarterback, and he's very effective on the move.
Yeah. The play action game sort of it very well feeds into the next part that if you want a blueprint for how to beat West Virginia, look at their own offense.
Yeah, it's a volatile. I suppose is probably the best way to put it. Uh, but
Yeah.
I guess I can take us into some of their scheming. But, they're an offense that is built on beating their own defense, which we're going to get into a little later. But all you need to know right now is that their offense is meant to beat single high coverages, with the lone exception more or less being slot fade, which is more of a two high beater. That means they run things like stick, bounce, mesh, and slot goes. It's a pretty solid blend of concepts that at least has options against most coverages, even though most of them are optimized for single high.
Yeah. And a lot of those concepts are stick is a man beater, bounce is a middle of the field beater that you're trying to beat on basically any linebacker playing a hook zone, which is pretty much every single zone coverage outside of like cover 4. But mesh is everyone runs mesh. I'm pretty sure that Army has installed mesh into their offense at one point or another. And then slot goes, which I should have clarified, it's slot out goes. I think I more meant out goes than slot, but it's the same concept that we've seen where you're trusting your guy to either win the one-on-one matchup on the outside or taking the first down throw most of the time to the near side of the field, because unless you have elite arm strength, which all respect to Garrett Green, he is not that guy. You do not throw the opposite side out. You do not throw the field side out. That is a bad idea. But a lot of their concepts are capable of beating, two high coverages, and most 3 high coverages are just slight variations of 1 high coverages, which is we're not doing that rant today, but not today. But it's a lot of blending the efficient concepts with the more high risk concepts most of the time off of play action, which, speaking of play action, the running game.
Yeah, the running game, outside of Garrett Green scrambling, that is, the running backs, they're all pretty good. And they blend a lot of running concepts together as well. They run zone slightly more than they run gap and counter. But you have to prepare for all of them because they're willing and able to hit you with just about any sort of run scheme. Their main guys this year have been Jaheim White and CJ Donaldson. They both have very, very similar stat lines in the run game. So they're pretty much splitting 50-50 in terms of the running load.
Yeah, and we're gonna have to play the game like we did the last time that we played against CJ Donaldson and see how many times they mentioned that he was a converted tight end, because he is a walking refrigerator. Like that is CJ Donaldson is probably just like Garrett Blunt again. But yeah, they're varied in their run scheming, which helps out the play action game, because a lot of the tells for a more zone-based play action game, you end up figuring out pretty quickly. And if you don't have a multiple running game, sorry, like you're at that point, you're just sort of running the play fake and hoping for the best. This is very much a run game that's schemed with genuine intent. It's very similar to, it's like the Diet Walmart brand version of K-State's run scheming. I did, first off, K-State's run scheming is infinitely more advanced, but it's more the point that they're multiple and will give you a lot of different looks. The lone exception to you can borderline predict it every single time is if they have a tight end out wide and they start motioning him towards the line of scrimmage, it's almost certainly going to be a lead zone play. Like that's just kind of a thing that they do every time. and it just works out in their favor because zone lead is a good play. But it's very much a running game that's schemed up with a lot of intention to keep you guessing. And there's one person that's going to keep you guessing both positively and negatively, and that's the first list on our names of notable offensive players.
Yeah, that's Garrett Green. He, in terms of the narrative around him, has probably seen just about everything in the course of his career. He's gone from a pretty much unknown backup that was just used as a pretty much a wildcat. Neil Brown has kind of had a penchant for taking his backup quarterbacks and bringing them in for run packages, which is what Garrett Green did a lot of. But then he went all the way from that to this year. In the preseason, he was getting some Heisman dark horse hype, which was always a little bit interesting, but to put it kindly. But so far this year, he's not really had a fantastic year, but he has definitely had positive moments, and he's still a very interesting quarterback. But that's all that makes him one of the most polarizing players in the Big 12. He has his best trait being an excellent improviser, which as far as being a college quarterback goes, being a great improviser, that's a pretty good trait to have. Whenever he gets out of structure, his play drastically improves, and he just has a really good knack for finding the open guy downfield or scrambling for a big gain. He has a career-long rush of 67. He has a long this season of 40. Last year, he had a 48-yard rushing. He had 13 rushing touchdowns last year as well. So he is very comfortable running the ball. But in structure, he is not as good. He's very uncomfortable with the idea of being on time with receivers around him. In fact, so uncomfortable with it that he's pretty much always looking to extend plays or scramble. So he's much, much, much more comfortable kind of putting the play into his own terms and his own timing. He does not want structure in the offense, or at the very least, he wants some in his mind, maybe it's organized chaos, I suppose, whenever he's scrambling out. But that's what makes him so volatile this year. He's got 11 total touchdowns on the season so far, 8 passing, 3 rushing. But then he also has 6 picks that he's thrown, and he's fumbled 5 times this year. So it really is flipping a coin with Garrett Green. You just do not know what you're going to get with him. The 8 touchdowns to 6 picks is pretty bad, but throwing the 5 fumbles, that is not particularly great either. He has also been more volatile as of late. All of his picks have come since the middle of September. The first 2 games, he didn't throw any. And when he throws his picks, he throws them in bunches because he has 3 games with 0 picks and 3 games with 2 picks. So unless K-State becomes the exception, we are either not picking him off at all or we're getting 2. So I guess we'll see if the pattern holds this week with Garrett Green. But definitely one of the more interesting names in the Big 12 in the last few years, I think, particularly just because of just how diverse the narratives have been about him and this West Virginia team as a whole.
Yeah, and to throw in another stat there, 57% completion percentage, which is really bad. Like, that is really bad. And that's with him scrambling. So I'm going to throw out words here, and I want people to pay very close attention to how I say this, because Garrett Green is Johnny Manziel if he didn't have Mike Evans. He's a very, very exciting player to watch, and he will make splash plays that make the highlight reels. But on a down-to-down basis, he is very, very inconsistent. And by inconsistent, I mean truly inconsistent. He can go from the best quarterback in the Big 12 to like a bottom 3 in between plays, and it's terrifying because you don't know. Like, you do not know what you're going to get with Garrett Green other than that inconsistency and that volatility. And it is a borderline miracle that this offense is as efficient as it is with a quarterback that has a 57% completion percentage and 11 turnovers. That is a credit to the offensive scheming. And I make it sound like Garrett Green's a bad quarterback. I don't think that. I think that he is probably the best improviser in the Big 12. Outside of Avery, Avery's a really good improviser. Donovan Smith, unfortunately, he got sent to the Shadow Realm because Houston is Houston. Oh no. Okay, that's a couple weeks from now problem. But I made a negative comment about a team, but that's a couple weeks from now problem. But Garrett Green is the epitome of it's so over, followed immediately by we're so back. And say what you want about him, he's fun.
Totally agree. I think that's a great way to look at it.
But now you get the lone first round pick on this team.
Yeah, that takes us to the anchor of the offensive line, Wyatt Milam. He's a projected first-round pick. He's probably the best tackle in the Big 12. He has not given up a single pressure this entire season, even against the fantastic rushers of Penn State and the Pitt defense as well, who's had some really good pass rushing this year, including Nate Matlick, the former Wildcat. He's got the best technique in the Big 12. It's really not close. He's still a good run blocker. We've been talking about his pass blocking a lot, and he's not a bad run blocker. But it's just pass blocking is his strength, which as a left tackle, that's generally what you want anyways. But he's got the functional strength and the technique to pretty much delete an edge player on any given play.
Yeah, and this is, I think that before Wyatt Milam, like the best Big 12 tackle that we faced was probably Patrick Paul of Houston last year, who for some ungodly reason was moved side of the line for only the K-State game, which made him significantly worse because fun fact, they're not the same positions. But yeah, Wyatt Milam he's Easton Kilty, but even more technically sound, bigger, and also a much better run blocker. Also known as a first-round offensive tackle prospect. Because Easton Kilty is going to get drafted. Wyatt Milam he's a guy that could be a franchise left tackle in the NFL who can make himself a lot of money this year. And he's an experienced guy too. He's played every single year that we've done the show. And he's gotten better and better every single year, from being kind of okay in 21 and 22 to being really good in 23 when we didn't see him, to being undoubtedly the best offensive tackle in the Big 12 this year. So, and the entire offensive line as a whole isn't bad, but Wyatt Milam by himself elevates the entire offensive line to being a dangerous group.
Yeah. Milam is going to be a force to reckon with whoever K-State elects to line up on him at any given point. I'm not really sure what the answer is there. I'd imagine we probably put Brendan Mott opposite side, but maybe we want to put good on good. I'm not really sure what the strategy will be there. But that takes us to the last group of notable players. I say group because we're going to talk about both of the running backs that I mentioned earlier. That's C.J. Donaldson and Jaheim White. They're perfect complements to each other. Donaldson is a walking refrigerator, and White is much smaller than C.J. Donaldson, but he's very, very fast. So they put together kind of a thunder and lightning backfield that keeps defenses guessing. Donaldson, he's been around the block. He's been at West Virginia for a while. He's got 80 carries for 378 and 5 touchdowns. Jaheim White very similar stat line, 68 carries for 398 and 5 touchdowns. So really the only difference there is 12 additional carries for Donaldson and 20 more yards for White. But they're very, very close together. And Gene White definitely the smaller back, 5'7", 195 to Donaldson, 6'2", 240. But yes, he is built like a fridge. You are absolutely correct. But this is a really good backfield, particularly when you pair with Garrett Green, who's got 65 carries of his own with 382 yards on the ground, and that's with 44 sack yards lost. So this is a very quality rushing attack. It's mainly those guys, the little Nico Marshall sprinkled in as the backup quarterback. But they've got 2 running backs they feel really comfortable with.
Yeah, and I genuinely believe that this team's probably 5-1 if they bother installing triple option at the beginning of the year. Like spread triple option, if they install that at the beginning of the year, they're probably 5-1, and they probably only lose to Penn State because Penn State's able to just out-athlete them. But yeah, CJ Donaldson, he's not just a strict power back. He's very similar to DJ in the sense that DJ has a lot more wiggle than CJ Donaldson, but stylistically, CJ Donaldson is just able to sort of move himself ever so slightly to make runs easier to power through and make tackles easier to power through. And the other back, Jaheim White, I don't want to call him a scat back because he's better than that. And their run game scheming really does emphasize the skill sets of both. So this is not a backfield to take lightly. Like they have playmakers in the running back room. And before we get into defensive scheming, I just want to make a point here. I didn't put it on the outline because I just realized it looking at the ESPN stats page, but their leading receiver, Hudson Clement, looks like JT Daniels without the unibrow.
No, he really does. I didn't put that together, but I was looking at his stats earlier. But he's definitely the best receiver they have, at the very least in terms of raw stats. And they have some interesting pieces in the receiving game, like Cole Taylor, I think is a really interesting tight end, particularly just because he's 6'7", 255, and there's an LSU transfer. But there's some players there that can burn us for sure. And yes, Hudson Clement definitely does. He is definitely reminiscent of JT Daniels.
Yeah, which is it's just fun. But now we can move on to the defensive scheming, which honestly, Connor, you may as well just go through everything up until the coverage because that's when the best that's the best time that I can bring out.
Yeah, they're very similar to what Colorado does. So we've seen a similar defense last week, with the exception of one very good edge rusher that we will talk about in a minute. They're a 4-down team with the hybrid look that at this point we are very familiar with. And if you listen to the show, you're definitely familiar with. They are atrocious on 3rd down, though. They allow conversions 44% of the time. So pretty similar number to what their offense is getting on 3rd down. And then they're not much better in the red zone either. They're allowing scores 80% of the time. But on that, only one of those scores is a field goal. The rest are all touchdowns. So once teams are getting into the red zone, you have a very good chance of being able to finish the drive with 6.
Yeah, and yeah, their defense, it's very strange in that Colorado had a bunch of individual pieces that just weren't really great at playing together yet, and I still think that sort of held true in that Colorado game. Like if they were playing it together as a defense, they were more than capable of Texasing us. I'm just really happy they didn't. But yeah, the West Virginia defense, I don't want to call it bad, but there are a lot of areas that it is definitely lacking. And I think funnily enough, it's the opposite problem of Colorado, where they don't have much in the way of star power. They have they have one guy they have 3 guys that are all going to get drafted, but they're all going to be lower day 3 kind of picks. So they don't have that sort of game-wrecking guy on defense, but they understand how they each play. Granted, they run like one coverage, so they better know how they play.
Yeah, they run a lot of cover 3. That's their bread and butter. Specifically cover 3 buzz, where the strong safety works into the hook zone window. That is a significant majority of what this West Virginia team is going to run.
Yeah, they're a single high team, very similar to Colorado, except for they are basically only playing cover 3 buzz. Sometimes they play man coverage. I think I may have seen them play a 2 high coverage like twice. They're basically trying to run the Legion of, where it was that press cover 3, really physical, really hard hitting defense. They are just not the Legion of Boom defense, because that was a unit of 1. Although the scheme was very, very highly replicated in the NFL, it didn't have the same success for a reason. But yeah, they're very much a single high safety team that wants to play a lot of cover 3, and yeah, that's their jam. And that sort of leads into defensive players of note, but that's really not exactly good news for West Virginia.
Yeah, the biggest news here is that their 2 best defensive players, edge rusher TJ Jackson and Aubrey Burks, those 2 guys are questionable. And Aubrey Burks is a safety. They are questionable at best for this game. And if they lose both of those guys, then they will definitely be losing the heartbeat of their defense. And it's a defense that has already been up and down and teetering on the edge of mediocrity throughout this year. So it's definitely a potential major issue for this West Virginia squad, because Burks hasn't played. At the time of the game, it will have been just about a month since his last game. He last played against KU September 21st. But TJ Jackson, the Troy transfer, I imagine he got hurt in the Iowa State game, if that's why he's questionable, because he did play in it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that would be a major, major blow for this defense. But we'll go ahead and get into some of these players now. TJ Jackson, the Troy transfer, he has been really, really great for West Virginia this year, despite just having an okay sack total. He has 25 total pressures this season, and he's very, very consistent with his power. He's a little shorter than you might be used to for a edge rusher. He's 6'1", but he makes the absolute most of it because he's great at getting lower and getting his pad level low. He's also 282 pounds. So not only is he really good at getting low as a edge rusher, but he has a lot of power that he can bring, and he can out leverage people.
Yeah, TJ Jackson, and we saw him up against with Troy last season, and he was the player that was giving K-State fits last year. So old friend alert. I really didn't think that we would be seeing him again, and yet here we are. But TJ Jackson is a phenomenal power rusher who just, for some unknown reason, isn't getting much in the way of draft hype, at least to this point. I think he is almost certainly the best player on this defense. He's probably one of the best true defensive ends, /3 techniques, because of how hybrid defenses get run. He's one of the better defensive tackle, defensive end hybrid players in the Big 12 this year. And a lot of that is the fact that he's able to generate so much power in such a relatively compact frame. I mean, there's a reason why you see most defensive ends and defensive tackles that are like 6'4" plus, but there's a reason why at the other end of the spectrum, guys who are strong, that are sub 6'2", round 6'1", there's a reason why they stand out so much, is because if you can get that power to where you're even at the same level of power as someone who is like 6'3" or 6'4", you're automatically lower than just about anyone that you're going up against. And low man almost always wins. So if he plays, he has to be the guy that K-State has their doubles on their protection on. He has to be. There's no one else on this defensive line that matches how much TJ Jackson can do. And that's why him not being here, because honestly, I look at his film, he's not going to get drafted this high. He won't. But I look at his film, and if that's a second round guy.
Yeah. And don't let the 3.5 sacks on the season can like make you think that he's having a lackluster year, because far from it. We've been, pressures are tracked, and that is proven to have a pretty profound ability on most quarterbacks and their ability to complete high-level throws. So definitely need to keep an eye on him, because that is not going to be an easy task for this K-State offensive line. In fact, he has more pressures this year than Brendan Mott does. By 2. Brendan Mott is 23. Granted, Brendan Mott did have 9 pressures against Colorado, which is just absolutely absurd. But,
yeah.
I really just wanted an excuse to say that. Casey got 27 pressures in that game against Colorado, which is, for those that don't know, 27 is a lot. Pressures. So just keep that in mind, I guess. But we can move on now to the next player. It's Aubrey Burks, a safety. He's a projected early day 3 guy, and he's kind of the heartbeat of the defense, but he hasn't been playing the last few weeks. Last time he registered any statistics was the KU game. But what he brings more than anything else is communication and versatility. And considering how he's their hybrid safety, K-State, the terminology we would use for him would be the jack safety. But he having great back end communication for your defensive backs is paramount to having a good defense. And that having guys that just know what they're doing on the back end. It's easier said than done, but it's kind of make or break sometimes for defenses, particularly ones that can't just rely on completely out talenting teams.
Yeah, and Aubrey Burks, he hasn't recorded a stat since KU. He keeps trying to give it a go. Like, he's registering some spot snaps. Like against Oklahoma State, he had 7. Against Iowa State, he had 27. He keeps trying to give it a go, but I think he just keeps re-aggravating the same injury because he refuses to sit down. And which that does not bode well for him not playing. He'll probably end up trying to give it a go for the K-State game, and he doesn't grade out particularly well on PFF, but that's because no one really knows what the jack safety is supposed to do unless you know the defensive call. So most jack safeties, unless your name is like Jalen Petrie, automatically start with like a -50 handicap. But Aubrey Burks is a really solid defensive back that you can definitely tell when he's on and off the field, just because the communication gets substantially worse when he's not on the field.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add on Aubrey Burks. So that can take us into the final defensive player of note, and that is Sean Martin, the senior defensive lineman. He's a single-digit defensive lineman as well, so he's earning a spot in my heart for that alone. But right now, he's a projected day 3 pick. He's more of a defensive tackle than a defensive end. That's just kind of life in a hybrid defense. He has 15 pressures on the year, although 6 of those did come against Albany. And he's another example of a guy who's just a very powerful tree stump. He's very difficult to move, but he's capable of pushing you back still. The biggest issue is that he's not the most productive in finishing the job because his style is more so to close the pocket as opposed to truly going for the sack. He does have a sack and a half registered on the season, but that's not really his primary goal.
Yeah, no, his primary goal is to just make you uncomfortable and then hope someone else is on cleanup duty, which again, that's just being a defensive tackle. But yeah, he's another guy that I would say he's as strong as TJ Jackson, but he's just taller, which weirdly enough is a disadvantage because he weighs the exact same. So they have two really, really strong defensive ends, and neither of them are as technically sound as another West Virginia defensive end that I still think about from time to time, and Dante Stills, because man, that guy could play, but he was really good. And I think that people forget about that, when they're not West Virginia fans. But Dante Stills, like independent of team, he was kind of one of my favorite players. But yeah, they have two really, really strong borderline tree stumps on the defensive line, and then one really, really good communicator. But that's really most of what their defense has going for them, because they're not particularly great schematically, because they run the same coverage or like the same three coverages every single play. And, they're just not getting it done, I think is the best way to put it. But that sort of leads us into offensive and defensive MVPs before we get into stories to watch and then our predictions. But Connor, I'll let you pick since you weren't here last week. You can pick what you get first.
I'll roll with the offense first here. And so since I'm rolling with offense, I'll go ahead and get us started then. I think I'm just going to pick DJ Giddens until proven otherwise at this point in the season. I can't really think of a great reason not to pick him. And with the way that he's been playing this season, he would be in the conversation for best running back in the country if Ashton Jeanty at Boise State didn't exist. But unfortunately, he has to deal with that reality. So tough luck for DJ. But I feel like I can safely predict probably another big game for him.
Yeah, I'm going to pick Jace Brown because I don't have a lot of faith in this West Virginia defense. I think that they're going to be in a lot of one-on-one situations because, as some great man at some point probably said, I don't remember who, but I remember hearing it and really liking it. At some point, every single high coverage just becomes man coverage. So I think that Jace Brown is the best person to beat that man coverage. So I'm projecting another really big game for Jace Brown if we basically just agree to scheme up the vertical passing game, because he was getting open against Colorado and there is not a soul on that West Virginia team that runs the 40s and has the agility drills that the Colorado defensive backs had. So on the defensive side of the ball, there's a lot of good picks here, but given how much Garrett Green wants to scramble and how much they want to run the ball, I feel like you have to pick one of the linebackers. I feel like you have to pick one of the linebackers or Siegel, and I'm not sure if Siegel's playing. I think he will, but I'm going to go with Austin Romaine because he has been quietly one of the best linebackers in the Big 12, which at this point, I don't know what – we're going to mention it every time. I don't know what the bigger evaluation L is, Jacob Parrish or Austin Romaine. At this point, I think it has to be Romaine. But he's been a really good quarterback spy, and he's been a really, really good run defender just in general. And that's sort of the entire West Virginia offense. So my pick is Austin Romaine.
I think that's a great pick. He had some great plays protecting the quarterback scramble last week, particularly when he made that stop against Shadur, where he was trying to get the corner in open space and he got him by the ankles. And that was a huge, huge, huge tackle by Romaine last week. But I'm going to roll with Brendan Mott instead. The main reason that I'm doing that is because I think he's had one game in Morgantown in his career, and that was probably the best game of his career back in 2022. He had a 3-sack performance against West Virginia all the way back then, what would have been Will Howard's like 3rd or 4th start of the season. So I'm rolling with Brendan Mott to potentially get a repeat performance. At this point, I think we can kind of safely start to consider him to be in contention for the single season sack record at K-State, which is kind of crazy. He's over halfway there, and we are less than halfway through the season. So I am willing to, at the very least, consider the possibility that he may end up getting the single season sack record, which last guy I would have predicted to ever get to that point. But the way he's been playing this year, he's been a man possessed, and he is his on the field product is putting him into some UDFA late day 3 draft discussions, I imagine, at this point. I mean, he's been having a phenomenal all Big 12 level season. So I'm going to roll with Brendan Mott.
Yeah, that is also a really great pick for a quarterback that doesn't like playing in structure. Because we saw what Brendan Mott did against a potential number 1 overall pick, which I could finally say it. I'm free of it now. Shedeur Sanders is not a first-round draft prospect. There is not a single first-round quarterback in this entire draft class. I said it. Say what you will, but that's out of the way. But we saw what Brendan Mott could do against Shedeur Sanders, who, being fair, he's probably early. But that's a much better quarterback than Garrett Green. Although, granted, Garrett Green has Garrett Green moments positive where he suddenly turns into the greatest quarterback in history. So I don't really know. But now I really only have one story to watch going into this game before we get into our predictions, and that how healthy is K-State? Because we talked a lot about West Virginia losing the 2 heartbeats of their defense. K-State was like down to their 5th string corner.
Yeah, I mean, a true freshman Zayshawn Rich was getting a very meaningful snaps in that game, which he's, I think, the first true freshman all season to play non-special teams. And I think he's the only still to play non-special teams, because we did see the first Devon Rice sighting of the year. We saw him get 3 returns. One was a bad decision, one was unlucky, and one was actually really good. But Zayshawn Rich, he was out there, and I had to squint my eyes because I thought I saw Echo Boydo for a second because he wears a 5, and I was like, "Oh, this can't be." So I'd remind myself that's Zayshawn Rich. Why is he out there? And that just goes to show the damage that was done to the secondary. And it also goes to show how quickly he's ascending. But beyond that, in terms of who's healthy in the secondary, I guess we can count on BJ Payne and Jordan Riley, because I think they were the only starters that didn't go out at some point in the defensive back room. If I had to pick a guy to be most worried about, I guess it'd be Parrish, because I think he's the only one that didn't come back, if I remember correctly. Garber was back out there the following series and seemed fine. Siegel, I think he came back at least a bit. But McKendry Steiger had a really big pass breakup on that final turnover on downs for Colorado. So I imagine we'll probably be seeing more of him. Daniel Cobbs, he had a couple of tackles, I think.
Including a big hit on Travis Hunter.
Yeah, so it was a big day for former Alleycat favorite recruit, Daniel Cobbs.
That's great.
Yeah, and I can't remember, did Dante Thomas play a little bit?
I don't remember seeing him.
I think what's confusing me is that Someone said, I think the PA announcer Colorado said Dante Thomas at one point, but I think he misread a number. I think he might have misread 12 as 15 because I think Strab Thomas is 15, and I think he may have been Steiger. But I seem to remember Thomas being said, and I was like, oh, that's surprising. But no, I bet Siegel probably plays. Garber, I think he's probably going to play too. Parrish, maybe we see him limited. But Kleiman did say in his availability that every guy is going to at least be able to like make it a tough decision on whether they play or not. So I'm looking forward to that at least because there should be some interesting lineup changes maybe.
Yeah. So it's everyone's favorite time of the episode, and that's projections. Connor, K-State wins if, K-State loses if, and what is your projection for this game?
I think K-State wins this game if they're able to play pretty balanced offense in this one, because I think that West Virginia does provide an opportunity for K-State to throw the ball around while also being really effective running it. And so I think that K-State's going to have to find a way to be effective in both phases because Colorado ended up, by the end of the game, I mean, they were pretty much running a 6-man front at the end of the game against K-State and saying, we dare you. And we took them up on that. So I'd imagine West Virginia might be trying to do some of the same against us at some point, particularly if they start out in base. So we're going to have to be able to be consistently effective in both the run game and the pass game. So we're going to have to find a way to make that work. And K-State's going to lose this game if they let Garrett Green get too much time to do Garrett Green things. So there needs to, A, be pressure, and B, if there's not a lot of pressure, we need to be covering well on the back end, which has been a tall task for this team. K-State's got one of the worst passing defenses in terms of yards and efficiency in the conference. So that's probably been the biggest disappointment of the season, I'd say. It's been the pass coverage. But that's going to be the main area, I think, where K-State can get exposed.
Yeah, I basically agree with everything that you said. K-State wins this game if they're able to sort of change it up a little bit, if they're able to establish a vertical passing game, because this is a defense, especially up the seams, because that's where cover 3 loses. Like, this is a defense where you can get those big chunk plays. So honestly, seam routes to Oakley, which I know are going to make you happy, are probably going to be among the biggest parts of the offense. But K-State can't afford to basically not be balanced in this game, because a big part of the cover 3 structure is, yes, you're giving up the seams, but you're also getting that extra body coming downhill to the box to sort of stop the run. Is West Virginia good enough to completely shut down the K-State running game? Absolutely not. But they are good enough to make it uncomfortable. Like, they're good enough to at least slow it down a little bit. So there needs to be a vertical element to the offense in this game. And that's going to come down to people like Jace Brown, Dante Cephas. That is a deep pull.
Yeah.
Dante Cephas and Keegan Johnson, if he's healthy. But K-State loses this game very similar to what Connor said. If Garrett Green just decides to have a heater, which he is more than capable of, if we let him sort of start improvising and start letting him get into a rhythm off of those play action boot plays, like, they're going to get some chunk yards just by virtue of Garrett Green somehow utilizing dark magic, probably from the coal mines. That thing wandering in them there hills is going to inherit Garrett Green and just turn him into a great quarterback for one play at a time. We can't let Garrett Green get to that sort of improvising structure. So if it were me making the defensive game plan, I would almost always have at least one guy to the field side playing contain and just watching Garrett Green like a hawk and make him beat you from the pocket. because that not doing that is the formula for how K-State loses, especially on the road on a West Virginia squad that, apparently has lost a little bit of the fan enthusiasm. But Morgantown is a weird place in a weird environment where sometimes things just happen. There's a reason why Morgantown was the WTF loss of the year for pretty much everyone in the preseason. That ended up being BYU, a second one. Connor, what is your score prediction?
I'm going to take K-State 38-27 in this one.
Yeah, I'm going to take K-State. I'm going to go with K-State's going to sort of temper down a little bit and probably separate a little bit later in the fourth quarter since West Virginia's had a problem with fading. I'm going to go with 28-17 in favor of K-State. But again, a lot of that is based on do not let Garrett Green get into his off-rhythm, I suppose it is. But do you have any final notes before we sign off?
I'm very happy this is a evening kick because getting like an 11 a.m. window after the game that started at 9:15, that would have been pretty brutal. I think particularly switching time zones again, but going the opposite direction, that could have really been something that affected us. But I think we really lucked out getting that 6:30 on Fox.
Yeah, big boy Fox too.
Indeed.
But that's pretty much all for this episode. So thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. If you want to follow or contact the show, you can follow us just about anywhere at Aggieville Alleycats. And if you want to email us, we're AggievilleAlleycats@gmail.com. If you want to follow us on a more personal note, I'm at ACEdwards00.
I am at Connor Balsor, capital C, capital B.
And if you want to support the show financially, please be sure to check out both the official Aggieville Alleycats merch store and the supporters link, both in our podcast and Twitter bios. But most importantly, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast, where come rain, shine, or anything between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. Stay safe, Alleycats.